In the year 2000, Electronic Arts got the license to make video games based on the Harry Potter franchise. Now, what do you do as a publisher if you want to capitalize on the release of the first film in 2001, Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, and maximize your reach towards as many players as possible? You release it for absolutely every platform, of course. And what do you do if all the platforms have different architectures and you can't spend time on porting? You hire more development teams to do a separate game for each platform. Of course! And then market it as one and the same title, bringing confusion to thousands of young players who don't understand why they don't seem to have things in their games that other kids do. Look, don't ask. The 2000s were weird like that. In the end, there are actually 5 absolutely different games, all named Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone. In this particular review, we'll discuss the PC version developed by No Wonder. It's an action-adventure where we take control of naturally Harry Potter during his first year at Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, although good luck understanding anything beyond that if you haven't actually watched the movie or read the book. Let's just put it this way. The explanation of what's going on is so general, and the semblance of any world building is so basic, that even the main antagonist is not mentioned until the very end of the game. The titular Philosopher's Stone is also not mentioned at all until the kids suddenly try to stop supposedly Professor Snape from stealing it, who is shown as being suspicious before you even know who Snape is. If we are to assume that a video game based on a movie or a book is also an adaptation, then Philosopher's Stone fails quite considerably in the story department, not weaving even a basic narrative thread through all the important events, while at the same time having a surprisingly big focus on subplots. For example, helping the dragon Norbert to hatch as well as sneaking him out the tower to send off to Romania gets a lot of focus, which is not relevant to the story. Unlike, let's say, properly introducing characters, most of whom are going to approach you with a "Hey, remember me" phrase.
Hey Harry, remember me? Ron Weasley.
Hello Harry, it's me, Hermione Granger. We met on the Hogwarts Express, remember?
Hello Harry, it's me, Hagrid.
Beyond that, some things just don't make sense in the context of the levels themselves. Before the troll sequence, Ron, whom you definitely remember, tells Harry that the troll trapped Hermione, whom you also definitely remember, in the bathroom. It's weird that he knows that already, but sure, let's go to the bathroom. Except the troll is not there. He will chase us through a set-piece jumping level towards the bathroom. So unless you're familiar with the source material already, the game just won't make sense. But for what it's worth, a video game adaptation is not just about the narrative, but also the feel and atmosphere. And for all its flaws, Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone does manage to utilize the strengths of the license in that regard. On a technical level, Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone shows all the signs of rushed development. Characters whose faces can look weird as it is don't move their mouths at all, which feels off even by 2001 standards. Animation consistently falters. For example, when casting spells during a locked-on segment, Harry will just slide through the floor should you move him, while when jumping, he has a tendency to grab invisible edges. And that's without even getting to some smaller details like the UI, which honestly looks somewhat hastily slapped together, and the in-game HUD, which lacks any sort of effects when you acquire collectible items, making it sometimes difficult to realize what has changed. However, I'd be lying if I said the game doesn't have charm. Visually, Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone doesn't try to recreate the movies, but rather go for its own, a bit more cartoony approach, and it definitely works. Hogwarts has a warm tonality that makes it look appropriately magical. There's a lot of neat details like robes swaying in the air during movement or Harry correcting his glasses during an idle animation. The overarching structure also makes sense from the perspective of immersion, regularly sending you on lessons to learn new spells you'll be using throughout the game. Though I would like to note that while saying an incantation is an important part of spellcasting in the Harry Potter universe, I wouldn't mind if in the game it wouldn't happen every single time.
Flipendo! Flipendo!
You will use these spells to collect just a bunch of objects required for your main objectives, like potion ingredients, fire seeds, or optional ones, like challenge stars. Those last ones are a quite abstract goal that wouldn't make sense outside the context of this being a game, but I do appreciate how it does tie these kinds of concepts to fit-in character moments, like Snape saying that challenge stars don't matter in his class.
I see you've collected a few challenge stars, but I'm afraid they have no value in my classroom.
As a result of this structure, a typical game section looks like this. You have a segment where you need to reach a certain place, then most of the time you get to a class teaching a new spell, followed by a collectathon obstacle range, and after, a broomstick level to break up the pace. This is essentially how the whole game goes until the final segments, where you have some set pieces, boss battles, and, get ready, a forced stealth section in an action-adventure game not designed for stealth. These sudden genre shifts are often questionable even in games that tackle their main focus at an appropriate level of quality, but in that regard, Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone is also not exactly among those titles. An action-adventure game is largely defined by how well it's played, and Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone does not play well. First, the character can't strafe unless you're in a specific section where the camera is locked onto a boss. This means that you have to move Harry through tank-like controls that just don't fit a game like this. Whenever you need to do slight corrections of movement, you look like a car that tries to switch to another parking spot. If you're in a room full of gnomes, it can be difficult to avoid them or find them in the first place. Then there's jumping. To be fair, the basic jump is fine. The strafe steering being the only way to course correct yourself during a jump is a bit weird, but it works. The frustrating element of jumping is the fact that Harry can't climb any ledge he gets to while midair unless he falls down far enough to grab it with his hands. Which not only looks weird, it can create a lot of strange situations when there is no bottomless pits below you. And to climb something that's not very high, you need to just walk towards it, but that combined with tanky controls means that in some situations you will climb objects on accident a lot. It doesn't help that the climbing animation is pretty long. And then there's the camera, which is not the worst, but also not great. It's glued to the character's back unless you're trying to cast a spell, in which case it follows the target and particles a bit. You can't rotate the camera without rotating the character. The position of the camera while standing and moving is different, and that can get pretty annoying, and you can look up and down only while standing still, with the exception of moving platforms. I guess because you change coordinates, the game doesn't count that as standing still. And while the fact that jumping on platforms below your height is essentially a matter of faith, to be fair, it has never led to any issues. The collision detection is wide enough that Harry can save himself from many potential falls. Finally, there's the actual act of spellcasting. In principle, it's very simple. Every interactable object has a particular spell assigned to it, and as long as Harry knows the spell, you just point at the object and click to cast it. To be fair, this does put the inclusion of spell lessons under question. Why does one need to trace and memorize a particular shape if that shape is not useful at all? You don't need to actually know any spells as a player, you just use every interactable you see. This trivializes the gameplay a lot to the point that you don't even have to care that much what and when you cast. I know it's a game aimed at children, but don't underestimate young players. Then the aiming is not consistent at all. Sometimes your mouse will not move and you will have to use the movement key buttons to assist with targeting, but also there are times when spells fail for no reason. So not only is spellcasting incredibly simple, it also doesn't always work properly. Other than that, there are a bunch of other small issues in the game, like the character being able to take damage while out of player's control during cutscenes, or the stun when getting hit being a bit too long, which can make it really difficult to avoid some attack patterns. Needless to say, all this can make playing the game pretty annoying, and it doesn't help that the aspects surrounding the core mechanics are not without questions themselves. For a game where you collect a lot of stuff, not much of it actually matters. There are house cup points and a whole UI section showing how many each of the Hogwarts houses has gathered up until this point, but there is no actual competition involved. You'll win at the end regardless of your performance. So these extra points that you get for perfecting lessons or finding absolutely all challenge stars are there just for completionist purposes. I guess it makes sense considering that in the game even a student can assign points because the teacher would be totally cool with it. The item that you will collect the most are multi-flavored beans, and you need them for two things. One, if you give enough beans to Fred and George Weasley, you will get a secret ending scene that does fit their personalities and therefore the license, but it's also pretty weird. Two, the same Fred and George will give you wizard cards. Now, the twins are just one source of the cards. Most of the time you will find them in secret locations. And even though they bear no practical purpose, the cards do have very nice art, and that is reason enough to want to get them. You receive the very last wizard card only if you collect the other 24 by the end of the game. I didn't. In fact, during the second half I didn't care that much about reaching locations that would obviously give you a card, because I knew all too well that I've already missed one anyway with absolutely no other way to get it. Granted, while permanently missable cards are an annoyance, there are a couple things that make it worse. First, the only indicator of how many cards there are in a level is on the short title screen before it begins. There is absolutely no way to know how many of the cards available you have already collected, which is especially bad when you're loading a saved game in the middle of a level. But even worse are unclear level end triggers. As an example, one area had 2 wizard cards, I only found 1. There was a spot which I didn't quite know how to get to, but I knew it most likely led to what I needed. And in the distance was Hagrid's hut, which I had to reach as part of my main objective. I could gather that getting to the gate would end the level. What I didn't know though, is that if I would just approach it from a fairly big distance in an attempt to find a path to the secret location, the game would still trigger a cutscene of me entering the hut. And then the next level would start, overriding my last save. No way to even try to get the card without replaying the whole game. There is a hefty number of moments like this. Sometimes you don't even know that a door you're opening will lead to an absolutely different level. And that's really annoying, particularly because the cards themselves are not that difficult to find. Levels in Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone are mostly very linear. They are actually structured in a way that you revisit different locations from time to time, creating a nice effect of going through an interconnected space. But at the end of the day, they're still essentially straight paths with secrets protruding at different points. Some locations have a bit more exploratory elements to them, but you're still steered towards the same main path. There's nothing wrong with that approach as long as the level design itself is good. And to be fair, it is fine. Yes, there are issues like unclear ending triggers similar to the ones I've mentioned that can mess up the collection gameplay, and at least one instance where a combination of your actions can block you from progressing and force to restart at the latest checkpoint. But in terms of actual placement of objects around the environments to create obstacles for the player, these are nicely designed levels. If you take the Flipendo challenge, it's a neat array of varying obstacles that test your pathfinding skills, environment observation, jumping precision, alongside combining a couple of those things together. Some levels get more verticality, like the Lumos challenge, where you will explore the same environments through different heights. Even the levels designed for stealth sections are fine, with enough ways to avoid filch and test your skills over and over again as you need to recontextualize the room that you're in after opening every door. But then we get back to the question of mechanics. Playing through these environments can get really annoying, particularly in the aforementioned stealth segments. Conceptually, they make sense. Harry is wearing an invisibility cloak and is only visible when casting spells. And it's really cool that in this segment he has a totally separate set of voice lines where he whispers the spells rather than yelling them out. That's good attention to detail. So you can be caught only while casting spells or bumping into Filch or his cat. They still react to sound, and there is a clear separation between rugs where Harry's footsteps are quiet and wood planks where they are loud. But this stealth segment still doesn't work for two reasons. First, you have no real way of knowing what is the distance at which Filch will hear your footsteps on the planks. Second, there is no way to sacrifice speed for silence, meaning that if you get into a situation where Filch is really close, you're pretty much stuck and better just get caught and restart from the last checkpoint. Another type of gameplay you will often encounter for the sake of variety revolves around flying on the broomstick. For the most part in these you need to either catch up or stay close to an object. And while the controls for flying are decent enough, because of the camera it can be really tricky to keep track of your target. And also, honestly, the levels themselves aren't that exciting, even Quidditch matches are just set dressings. There's no challenge or actual variety. And look, in no way do I fault developers for all this. Making games is difficult, making them based on a license doubly so, especially with very strict release date deadlines and most likely very short production times. But still, there is enough arguments gathered to score the PC version of Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone with my Stasocritic rating system. Stasocritic is divided into 5 different categories of various weights, each having its own set of scores from 0 to 10 with specific criteria. The first category is design, which has the biggest weight, 4, as gameplay is extremely important. And I will assign a 4. We can literally separate what's going on with Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone into 2 halves. Levels, which are actually fine, and mechanics, which are very flawed, making the act of actually playing the otherwise fine levels very annoying. So it is essentially a mixed bag, since adjusting the mechanics would instantly make the game far more enjoyable, even if it wouldn't fix other larger issues at hand, like the absolute uselessness of house points and the frustrations surrounding the wizard card collecting aspect. The next category is the most subjective one, emotions, and it has the second largest weight, 3, as enjoyment can be a lot more important than what we consider to be objective arguments. Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone is a good example of that. I don't know if it's related to nostalgia, maybe there is some bias since I've played this as a child, though I can't say that I felt this history affected me in any way, but despite all the issues in the game, I enjoyed it and will assign a 7. Yes, there are frustrating movements, but never so frustrating that you feel like you're raging, you just say, I guess it is what it is, and move on. And it's not a very long game, you can beat it in about 5 hours, so it's a nice way to spend an evening or two. I certainly wouldn't try to 100% it or replay ever again, but I had a nice, inoffensively enjoyable time. And isn't that what matters anyway? Then we have cohesion, a category with a weight of 2 that's all about how different game elements connect together to form a wholesome experience. I will assign a 6. A lot in Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone doesn't make sense, but at the same time, it does leverage the license enough to feel like Harry Potter despite all the abstractions. But this doesn't help context, a category that's all about providing proper role, motivation, plot, whatever is needed to understand why we're doing what we're doing. I will assign a 2. If you have no knowledge of the source material, you will understand at a broad basic level that you're Harry Potter and you have some friends that help you prevent something bad from happening. And even that will be accompanied by a lot of confusion and poor dialogue. And finally, there is aesthetics, which is a category about everything that pleases the senses. I will assign a 7. At its core, Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone is a game with a very magical atmosphere, but it's full of things that are either just okay, like the voice acting, and outright technical faults that prevent the aesthetics from reaching their true potential. And after the scores and all their weights are taken into account, the PC version of Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone is going to get assigned a final Stasocritic rating of 53. Now, let me be clear, Stasocritic is not Metacritic. 50 means alright, not bad. And Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone is certainly that. It's got issues, but there are things to enjoy as long as you are a Harry Potter fan, or as long as you know what to expect if you're not. Thank you all for watching, I hope you have enjoyed the video.